All right, today I'm so happy to welcome my friend Evan Greger. Thanks for being here, Evan. And
Thank
we are
you.
going to talk about in this video self-judgment and comparison and how this gets us stuck, negative self-thinking, and if this can paralyze us from things like sharing our work, our creative work, joining and performing music for people. It can paralyze us also in posting on social media.
Hmm.
Sometimes I've been in situations where I spent a long time and then I was just going back and forth and beating myself up. Should
Hmm.
I post this or not? Find myself sometimes seeing other people that are sharing on social media and it seems like they're doing really well. And then I feel jealous or I'm comparing myself to them. I find myself having all these negative feelings. So I am going to kind of act as a guinea pig in this conversation where I share problems, and some of them may be real problems that I'm actually having, or just for the sake of this to kind of get your insight. Because, Evan, you are tremendous. I've seen you
Oh,
help
thank you.
a lot of people work through a lot of fear and get a lot of resolution from it, and it's made a big difference for them. So anybody, if you're listening on the podcast audio version, you can find more free resources and also paid courses that Evan has done. And I would say the best link is to go to christianhouse.com/freedom, christianhouse.com/freedom. If you're watching on YouTube, we've got several links. We'll post them below in the description. So, Evan, let's start off with this first scenario where I'm kind of talking about, like, okay, let's say I'm sitting down to share some work. Maybe it's a musical work. Maybe it's like a recording that I made and I want to share it on Facebook or on Instagram. Maybe it's a photo or a picture. Maybe it's something that I'm writing down. But I feel paralyzed and I feel stuck and I'm like, I can't decide. Should I share this? Is it good enough? Is it not good enough? Are people going to reject me? Where do I go from here?
Okay, well, in general, just to give a slight overall framework, I like to look at it like it's a conversation that we're having with ourselves, which I think that's relatable to most people. You can literally hear yourself asking those questions inside your own mind, right? Should I post this? Should I not post it? And the fascinating thing about that is there is an actual conversation happening. Someone is talking to someone, so to speak, which means there is an actual relationship there. And so I try to put the emphasis on the fact that there is a relationship there. And so what you'll notice, even in the way you ask the question, which is the way most of us ask the question, tends to be framed in, okay, like here's me, and then here's what I'm imagining other people will think, right? And here's how it might be received, how it might not be received. So we're relating everything sort of to the outside world and how we're imagining things might go. And as you notice, that is endless, right? It will literally bounce back and forth endlessly. It might be a good idea. Your mind will generate why it might be good. People might give you a big thumbs up and say, thanks for sharing. Thanks for being so vulnerable. And then 5 seconds later, it shows you all the negative possible consequences, right? And no side will ever really win like that. That's why you can be stuck in this type of paralysis literally for your whole life. So, what you don't recommend, or what I don't recommend, is to just act like you're just going to decide and expect that to calm things down. Because the second you decide one, the other voice comes up and goes, well, maybe I should be doing it. Maybe I'm not being proactive enough, right? You say, you know what, I'm just going to decide to never post again. We've all said that. We've all made decisions. I'm just not going to do it. Or you know what, tomorrow I'm going to be bold and I'm going to post it. It doesn't matter really that you've made that decision because the other objections are still there. They're still active inside and they're still going to go, wait, maybe that's a good idea. Maybe that's a bad idea, right? So you don't end that conversation by focusing on the outside world and the outside possible consequences. You begin becoming your own best friend, therapist, parent, however you want to think about it, in terms of actually listening and validating both sides of that conversation, which we think we're doing because we think, okay, these are the good sides, these are the bad sides, right? But it's very different than if it was as though a child, for example, your own child or your own niece or nephew was coming up to you and saying, man, I'm really scared about posting this. you would listen to that child or that niece or nephew with a certain level of attention. Like, oh, really? Okay, what are you afraid would happen? And you would listen to the response, and you would maybe help kind of coach them through that or validate their feelings, right? We tend to not do that with ourselves. We tend to think of it like it's just this sort of objective pro and con list, and we just kind of muscle through it, or woman up, man up, make the decision, right? Whatever. But really, there are actual fears and concerns embedded in that internal debate. Literal past rejections in your life that you might not even remember from when you're like 2 are often operating in that, going, yeah, if I post this and people don't like it, my whole nervous system thinks I'm going to be abandoned even. And that might sound extreme, but that can literally be operating in these types of conversations. So you want to respect that this is a conflict inside of yourself between parts of you that have legitimate concerns, legitimate fears, sometimes legitimate wounds and pain behind them. And then that helps you take it more seriously, which just simply can involve listening. Okay, what am I really concerned about? What happened if I post this? And again, it's not just a pro and con list. It's an actual listening. It's a turning inside to what feelings are coming up. And then if something comes up and goes, oh, I'm afraid, for example, if I post this, no one's going to like me and no one's ever going to call me for a gig again, right? Now, part of your conscious mind goes, yeah, well, that's extreme, right? But to the part of you that feels that, it might feel very legitimate. So you don't dismiss it. You don't go, oh, that's silly. That'll never happen. It's just a post. You go, no, wow, okay, fascinating, right? You respect what comes up. Say, wow, there's a real deep fear and concern here. Let me just acknowledge that. Let me just sit with that and be present with it. So before even going into all the possible techniques and everything, that is, in my opinion, the biggest quote unquote technique, is this shift in perspective where you just take what's coming up inside of you as legitimate, for lack of a better word, serious. I mean, you take it seriously. You listen to it. You listen to it with empathy and concern and curiosity, as though it were, someone you care about. Because we should listen to ourselves as though we're someone we care about. And the moment you start doing that, even if you do nothing else, you're likely going to find the whole process is very different. Because instead of just trying to bounce back and forth, should I post, should I not post, and all these ways we try to mentally adjust it, it turns into the emotional process of what is the emotional fear behind this? And literally just listening to it can often help that process. It can often bring this to clarity simply by doing that before you even get into some of the different tactics you can use. So does that kind of framework help with that?
I think it will. And I think especially if we go through it a little bit where, you kind of help me have that kind of conversation with myself. So I'd like to do that. And
Great.
maybe that'll be kind of the focus for what we do in this conversation today. And I want to ask for your input on this, but I mean, if I'm talking about kind of my fear of, posting something on social media, whether it's an artistic work, whether it's a photo, whether it's whatever, is that like also relatable for someone who is afraid of maybe performing or joining a jam session or even finishing a composition or even like practicing? Is it a similar type of process? I'm just curious.
I think the process is somewhat universal in the sense that it's a fear of being seen, fear of being exposed, fear of putting your content, whether that's your own physical body and your actual playing, or something you've shared, a thought that you're coming up with, that is in essence saying, here's what I'm actually feeling or thinking or expressing. And then the natural human concern, which has everything from social to evolutionary reasons why there would be concern of how well it's going to be received or not received. I think the mechanism is somewhat similar. What's beautiful is the nuances of each person are going to be a little different.
Gotcha. So, let's go through it then. Let's
Okay.
kind of put me, I guess, on the couch with you. And I've seen you do this with a lot of people, including myself before. And so for people that are listening or watching, this is something that you can be a part of with Evan. We host different calls where we get on, we have different courses. Again, we're going to link to those. So let's just go through that conversation with me and you.
Mm-hmm.
How I'm going to let you take the reins and let me know how we get through that.
So the first thing I'd ask you to do in this case is to not make it hypothetical as best you can. It's sometimes challenging when you're going to be aware that you're hosting this
Yeah.
video and this call. So that
Gotcha.
automatically puts a little bit of that, but
Right.
as best you can for a second, closing your eyes might help, and just let into your mind the idea that the less hypothetical you are, the more you actually make this what you, Chris, are really feeling.
Yeah.
By proxy, that actually makes it more useful for
Yeah.
people rather
Absolutely.
than trying to speak on their behalf, because that often happens in these types of environments.
Yep.
So if you can kind of connect to also the nice thing about this for anyone listening is even when you're working with someone in this capacity, it's not really necessary that you share the exact detail. Like I was concerned about sharing this specific thing. You're welcome to share it, but it's not usually necessary in order for you to get some
Honest.
groundwork. So if you don't feel comfortable, if you're
Right.
doing this on your own, saying like, yeah, I wanted to share this about my son and I felt uncomfortable, you can just say there was something, right?
Yeah.
Whatever
Gotcha.
level you're comfortable with sharing, but connect as best you can to a real experience
Yep.
that you've had or are having with this. And then give yourself a moment to not only take yourself back there or connect to it if it's present, but also some people are not able to do this at all. It's totally fine if you're not. But if you have any sense of awareness of what happens to you physically, if your breathing changes, if your posture changes, if your things tense up as you think about it, you can include that into the package of what kind of thoughts and feelings are coming up.
Great. Got you. I got it. Okay. I got that. I will do that. It's going to be real.
Okay, good. Yeah. So what is the experience that you're going through right now, or has a past kind of charge to it?
Yeah. So it's something that definitely has been a recent thing that I've felt. And it has to do with when I'm in a situation of sharing content, whether it's on social media or in emails, and whether that's going to like a broad audience or whether it's going to a defined audience, let's say of like students or friends. And so in that situation, like I find myself second guessing, should I share this or not, and endlessly revising and
Mm-hmm.
endlessly circling around and being like, oh no, spending like an hour on it and like, no, I'll save it for later, coming back to it later, being like, this is great, but then changing my mind, and then like, or maybe I might post it, but then I'll immediately retract it or wish that I could retract it.
Mm-hmm.
um and sometimes when this happens, there might be a request associated with it, or there might not be a request.
Mm-hmm.
So, like for a request might be like, for example, hey, go check out this link, or consider signing up for this course, or support me in this way, or support me in that way. Or there might not be a request. It might just be, here's a video of a piece of music that I played.
Okay. So it doesn't specifically correlate to if it's sales.
Doesn't have to be. It could just be, sometimes it might, but it
Mm-hmm.
could also just be like, a 30-second reel where I'm playing my violin on Instagram
Okay, good.
or on YouTube.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think thanks for sharing that, because I think people will find that valuable, because that's not what people would assume about you. Because you're very prolific, you send a lot of emails, you put a lot of content up. So it seems like you would just have no problem with that, just for people
Right.
listening, which is always fascinating because you never know what's actually going on with someone. You can
Yeah.
never assess it accurately based on what you're just seeing the output is. So if you can, as you have been recalling that experience, right? What would be interesting is to put your attention on whatever it is, whether it's a voice or a thought. There's something that is driving that sense of, I need to edit this, I need to keep revising this, I need to come back to this later, right? And if you can describe what that feels like, and also take a moment to zero in on it and actually ask inside the question, okay, why is it so important that this be, and I'm even curious what the answer is. Is it that it needs to be perfect? Is it this just
Mm.
afraid of whatever it is? Is there a specific meaning? Is there a specific thing it wants to get right? Just kind of see what
Yeah.
comes up around that.
Yeah. So the first thought that comes up for me, or the feeling that I have is like, is it good?
Okay.
Like if I'm performing, then is it good? Well, and there's one question is like, you know, objectively speaking, did I play well, or do
Hmm.
I think I play? Because sometimes I don't always trust my own opinion about that, right? Because
Sure.
you're a great bass player, and in the moment, sometimes we don't always know whether our perception is, if we can trust our perception. I might play something and then listen to it today and be like, I think I like that. But then tomorrow I listen to it and I'm like, oh, wait a second. What was I thinking? I don't like that. So there's that level of, is it good? But then there's also the level of, even if I think it's good, maybe other people won't think it's good for 1,001 different reasons.
Okay. And then just seeing if either of those has more weight to you, if either feels more painful. So
Hmm.
imagine that you do put it up and then tomorrow you go back and you go, okay, oh, this kind of sucks. Now, just stay with that for a second. And is it more that, oh, I don't like it? Or even after I don't like it, is it more that, oh, I don't like it. Now, what are the other people going to think? Just see if any has more weight and where your mind goes with it.
Yeah, I think it's like, what are other people going to think? That resonates as like, maybe that people are going to see through me and they're going to, the word like fraud comes up to mind, that
Okay.
people are going to think I'm a fraud. Like, he's not really that good, because I think that a big part of how I identify is as a expert musician,
Okay. Very good.
expert violinist, right? But then if I play a note that's really out of tune, which can easily happen on
Hmm.
a violin, or whatever, or if I play like out of rhythm or whatever it might be, that people would be like, wow, that sounds horrible. I thought he was an expert.
Okay. So there's a whole layer to that, which is just notice now that when you talk about sharing content, right? Notice that there's a big part of you or a big part of the energy of the whole thing that says, I am an expert or I am claiming to be an expert and everything I do has to reflect that.
Mm,
So it's not just, is it good, right? It's, is this world class?
mm,
And does this accurately represent me as what I'm either believe I'm supposed to be or I'm supposed to be trying to convey to the world? Now that's pretty deep, right? Because notice there's a big difference between that and just, hey, I'm sharing my playing today, right?
mm. Yeah.
That's one thing which already is challenging. But now if embedded in the background is these sort of assumed layers of, I am Chris Howes, I'm supposed to be this. Therefore, everything I write, everything I play should be up here. And if it's not, I constantly face the scrutiny of someone. You then imagine them going, well, he's not so great. He's
Mm,
not the expert he's claiming to be.
mhm.
So just take a moment to just sort of observe that whole package and that whole package exists, let's say, in your mind, right? Like
Mm.
there's no objective fact that someone getting your email goes, okay, this is Chris House, this better be amazing. And they're watching it and go, there's it out of tune. He's a fraud, right?
Oh, it's like, yeah, it's like that makes me think like every time that I'm sharing something about myself, it's like an audition or it's a
Yes.
chance to be rejected, like that people are going to, and it feels really final too. Like if,
Yep.
it feels like if I get it wrong, people are just going to just completely just write me off. They're going to
Yep.
just shut me out. They're going to just be like, oh, forget this guy. And it's not even, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. Cause part of me feels like, okay, I need to be perceived as an expert, but part of me doesn't even feel that that needs to happen, but that it
Hmm.
just needs to be good. And that if people are going to be like, I saw this thing from this guy, or I saw this music and I didn't like it. Okay. I don't like him.
Right.
I'm writing this guy off.
Okay. Yeah. So that extra layer of this is an audition and the standards are high and the stakes are very high, that can put the whole thing into a much clearer context, right? So instead of saying, well, why am I struggling to post something on social media or send this email? You kind of validate whoever or whatever in there is saying, no, this is an audition. I am putting something out there that's about to be judged as an expert. It's going to be judged by a high standard. And if it doesn't go well, the stakes are very high. And loss of perception could mean loss of gigs, could mean loss of reputation, could mean loss of money, right? All of that is
Friends,
very,
friends,
Mhm.
status, like whatever you want to call it. Like, I mean, not that I like to think that I'm motivated by, or not that, even that I feel like explicitly like, well, really would I lose friends if they didn't
Mhm.
like a post? But I guess if I'm being honest, well, that feels somehow like that's in there, you
Totally.
know?
It's totally in there. So the most important thing now is not only to see it, but to take it from kind of an intellectual, like, oh, that's it's sort of an aha in your mind, but to, it might be, one of your children, it might be a student you're close with, comes up to you with that angst, with
Hmm.
that dread on their face,
Yeah.
saying, if I want to write, I want to send this email and I want to post these videos and I think they're going to do good for my career, but man, I feel like people are going to judge it and they're just going to completely reject me. Like I'm going to be a total, and you can fill in the blank if you have your own, like I'm going to be a failure, I'm going to let people down if this doesn't go well. And I say to imagine the other person because for a lot of people that's easier to have the kind of empathy with, for
Right.
to kind of hit you in the heart a little more and have that sense of, whoa, okay, this is no joke. This is like someone or something in there that's really has some fear and pain around the consequences are very high here. And just sit with that for a moment as though it's not just you as another piece of data, like, wow, that's fascinating. I have all this fear of rejection. But connecting to the part of you that actually feels that really feels this deep, whatever, fear, consequence, and giving yourself just a moment to put your attention on that and experience what it's going through, the actual, what that fear actually feels like, what the expression on its face might be, for example.
Mm.
And giving it a moment to not try to strategize it or even tell it, no, it's okay, you're fine, because it doesn't think it's fine. So we can almost gaslight parts of ourselves. We're like, oh, no, it's fine. It goes, no, I'm not fine. This is a real problem.
So I just want to make sure I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying kind of like imagine that like one of my kids is coming to me and they're like, hey, I'm afraid to, you know, to I'm afraid to perform, or I'm afraid to speak, or I'm afraid about this interaction or about sharing something. Or one of my students is like
Yeah.
afraid to share. And so so I'm imagining that it's somebody else that
It's
has
it's
this.
like it's well, you're connecting to your feeling of it,
Mhm.
how you experience the sort of fear and the anxiety around it. And one way to describe it might be put one of their faces on that voice.
Right. So it's the fear inside of me, the
Mm-hmm.
voice inside of me that is afraid or paralyzed about this decision or whether to take this action. I have to kind of almost personalize it or like
Yes.
make it like pretend that that is another person.
I find that's useful because we tend to relate to ourselves pretty
Gotcha.
harshly. And it's actually it's more an invitation to try it.
And that face could look like one of my students, it could look like one of my kids or a niece or a nephew, and then I'm trying to kind of listen to what it's saying, which what it's saying is I'm afraid of posting this thing because people might reject me.
It's right. It shifts, it's the way you listen. Because there's a way of listening that goes, oh, I'm afraid. Okay, I'm afraid, whatever. I shouldn't be afraid. I should get over that. Or I'm afraid, oh, that's interesting. What do I do about it? Versus when someone comes up to you and you actually see the fear on their face and you can see, I need help. I need support. I'm coming to you as someone who needs support, you listen differently.
With compassion.
Yes, that's the
So
main
like,
word.
yeah, if like my niece or my nephew comes up and say, "Hey, I'm really afraid about, doing this thing that I have to do," um, then I'm going to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, that tell me more about that. Why are you afraid?"
Right.
I'm not going to minimize it. I'm not going to be like, "Oh, you shouldn't be afraid of that. It's going to be fun." That's like, I don't want to shame them for having those feelings because they're legitimate feelings. Like they feel afraid. And so I want to, so what, yeah. So how do I treat myself in that way? What's the next step?
The first is to just try that and watch what happens. So sometimes it's easier said than done, but you'll just notice that natural sort of sense of compassion of, wow, okay, I didn't realize this was so intense for you. Like, tell me more. Or what are you really so afraid of? But not in just, I'm just trying to extract data, but in this sense of I'm trying to connect with you, trying to create a space where you feel more safe and I'm listening to you to try to get a better understanding versus, oh, you're afraid, just get over it. Like you said, it's very easy to do that with yourself. So see if you're able to just stay there for a second and you're not trying to technique it. You're not trying to even get an answer. You're just practicing taking that fear and concern seriously and listening to it with a sort of more compassionate ear. And literally just try to do that and give that like 30 seconds and then just describe what happens.
Okay. So I think one of the things that happens is one of the realizations that comes up for me is kind of recognizing that there's this voice, this kind of scared voice inside of me, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it is an expression of having felt hurt in
Yeah,
some way. And that
good.
there's this sense of that it's like there's it's wounded.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's the first
Exactly.
thing that kind of comes up to me. Just like if my niece or nephew came up and they're like, "I'm afraid of this thing," I would feel like, okay, there's some kind of pain there.
Good. Yeah, so you sense sort of intuitively that there's an actual pain there. There and that it's rooted in a history. It's rooted in actual events. And see, now we're no longer talking about a post. We're talking about here's a pain that I've been living with.
Hmm.
That's what I love about this process is because life life is I need to post, right?
Hmm.
And then through whatever we have to do, fears and doubts come up. And now if you trace them, you like life is always trying to show you, okay, here's where your pain is, right? When we treat it that way, when we listen to it that way, this particular pain, whether it's a specific event, it could be a trauma, it could be anything, that's actually coloring every aspect of your life, right? So even if there was a like a hack that could make you post tomorrow, I wouldn't want to give it to you
Hmm.
because it would just be a little band-aid and then the next thing you'd have to use another hack and then eventually the house of cards would collapse. Whereas in this case, it's like, I'm afraid, good. That's that's the wound giving the chance to come up to the surface to say, yeah, this is this is what's really going on here. It's not really just about the post. The post was a means to kind of get to this, right? Now, there's obviously more to do once that comes up. Like that's a big beginning, but it is a beginning. It's a question of, is this the context we want to go more into that? Do we want to, save that for the sake of time
Yeah.
and so on? But the context should be clear. And I just want to definitely say that doesn't mean like, okay, now you go into 30 years of talking about it.
Right. Right. Right.
By the act of doing that, you've already helped it tremendously because it's
Yeah.
finally been listened to. That alone has created all sorts of benefits that you might not even instantly be able to see. But it's not like, okay, now I found the problem and I need to hammer away at it. It's like, it's just a deepening of that process of listening and it
Right.
revealing more to you. And then you having some trick. What I was doing here was something called EFT. I just started tapping intuitively on these parts of my body.
Is that emotional freedom technique? Is that what that is?
Yeah, that's something I'm certified in, and I'm getting another level of certification in at the moment, and it's very useful because it's a biological thing that physical touch is key, very helpful, if not necessary, for resolving certain things that are held in the body, because the body literally stores emotions and trauma. So things that engage the body, even deep breathing and such. So, you just sort of adding this layer of listening to this way of, let's call it, relating to yourself
Right.
with some other tools that actually help that energy go from being wound up and frayed and wounded
Right.
to actually, okay, how do we actually heal the wound?
Right. And what I'm hearing is, well, number one, there's just recognizing,
Mm-hmm.
it's just like recognizing that there's pain, right? Which maybe I wouldn't have called it that before we went through this process so far.
Totally.
And then there's number two, which is having compassion, in this case, towards myself, towards this pain that maybe I still don't understand that much more about yet, but just the act of having compassion for it is going to create some benefit. Is that right?
Yeah. The only thing I'll add is because some people, even when you start using words like listen to it with love or compassion, some people's brains just turn off,
Hmm.
or they say, well, I'm not a compassionate person. It doesn't have to look a specific way, right?
Gotcha.
I call it the way you relate, because for some people it might be more accessible, like the way you relate to your buddies, right? Where it's like,
Yeah.
hey man, what's going on in there? Right? Like that might be the way to it.
Right.
Whereas for other people, it's this very like, tell me everything, tell me. And for other people, you
Yeah,
just see their eyes glaze over when you
Right,
start
right,
talking
right.
about that.
Yeah, compassion can look a lot of different ways.
That's a new twist on it for me, where
Yeah,
I've found it that turns people off, whereas it shouldn't, in the sense that this process doesn't have to look flowery, and the
right.
way you talk to yourself doesn't now have to suddenly start
Yes.
sounding like some hypothetical Mother Teresa. It can
Right.
be the way you talk to your friends at the jazz club, which is like, hey man, you feeling all right?
Yeah.
It's like, it can be
Gotcha.
like that, and that part of you goes, oh, okay, he's listening, she's talking to me.
That's super helpful. And I feel like yeah, I feel like we should wrap it up, but
Mhm.
also maybe this would normally be something that we would go into deeper and deeper layers of, to keep kind of revealing, because I've seen you do this before with people, and it's really deep. Um and as you said, it's about continuing to have that conversation, and then finding ways that instead of like pushing through a pain or trying to ignore it or trying to beat it, that we try to find like a mutual, what's the word, what would you say?
Reconciliation, yeah,
Yeah.
resolution. And it's true, because there is a mutually agreed upon path. There is a way to keep sharing and posting that doesn't feel so dreadful,
Yeah.
and it involves working on both sides. It might be adjusting what you post, it might be while simultaneously working on this part of you. Now then they stop butting heads. You start checking in. You go, okay, what's okay to share right now? What would make it okay to share more? And it will literally start communicating with you, because the conversation's happening anyway. That's the irony, right?
Yeah.
It's not like the conversation is a new idea. The question you posed at the beginning was literally an internal conversation. Should I post it, or what are they going to think? The conversation's happening. We're just trying to make the conversation productive instead of two sides beating their heads against each other.
Yeah, love it. Well, so for everybody listening, I want to make sure you have ways to get access to more of this stuff from Evan. And so if you're on YouTube, just check the links in the description. If you're listening on the audio podcast, I'll put links in the show notes. You can also go to christianhouse.com/freedom. You can also just look for Evan Gregor, GREGOR.com. Evan and I work together on a lot of programs and courses that are very, very accessible for people. And Evan also does one-to-one stuff. So make sure to check the links. If nothing else, we're going to have some free stuff linked up at christianhouse.com/freedom. And maybe we'll continue this, Evan, soon. I know that we're always continuing this in one way or another. So thanks so much, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it.